authenticity is not a reflection. Okay, it's an introspection.
So for those who don't know this guy, although I'm sure all of you, particularly those in Australia, will know him, Kerwin has consulted in 11 countries and 150 different industries and taught more than 100,000 people how to grow their business. He's host of the awesome podcast Unstoppable, and he's been very busy during the pandemic, as you've probably seen through all his social media. I know he's got some amazing stuff today. So I'm going to hand back over to Ronsley, who will lead this session with Kerwin, but let's welcome Kerwin Rae.
Thank you very much.
Hey, Stream Machine.
Thanks, James. Yeah, I know, right?
How are you, brother?
I'm unstoppable, brother. How are you?
I'm extremely well. Thank you for doing this. Thank you for making the time. It's an extreme pleasure to host you at We Are Podcast.
Let's get straight into it. You have been very vocal about COVID, and even before it went out, you were having conversations. Let's start with what tipped you off. What was the tipping point? What kind of got you to start to think and look in that direction? And then how did you trust that? And how did you go down that path?
Yeah, great question. COVID came on my radar on January 7th. On January 7th, I'm a natural intelligence gatherer. I love data. I love research. I'm obsessive when I'm interested in any particular subject. And as a general rule, I'm always just scouring a range of different source sites for breaking news that isn't necessarily mainstream. And when COVID came up, look, I was around when SARS hit, but for some reason SARS didn't really get on my radar. But as soon as I still remember reading the headline, my gut just twinged, and I went straight in. And at that point, there were many parts of China that had been shut down for a number of weeks, and some parts of China had been shut down for, I think, 3 weeks at that point. And then by, I think it was about the 14th of January, there were some parts of China at that point where it had been shut down for a month. And so it was on the January, and this is all the while it's spreading. And Corona at this point is on mainstream, off mainstream, on mainstream, off mainstream. There was even 2 days, I think it was between January 15 and January 24, where Corona was actually pulled off a lot of mainstream news sites. And there was no actual mainstream information on some of the majors, at least here in Australia anyway, and also in New York at the time. And yeah, January 18th, I put in my first order for 200 masks for myself and for my team, because we were about to embark on a 11-city tour around Australia over 30 days. And then it was on January 29th, we came up with our first bio-threat security response plan to be able to basically respond, to whatever was going to be coming our way as a result of COVID. And so, we were about, let's call it 7.5 weeks ahead. Fast forward until March, we were in the middle of a 400-person event. And the government was kind of teetering on making the announcement of events below 500. But I felt, I guess, enormous social conscience, where I knew I was going to be hugging about 400 people over those 3 or 4 days, multiple times. And I knew if there was going to be a spreader in the room, I was going to be that guy. And I just didn't want to be necessarily responsible for what could have come from that. And so halfway through an event, we literally shut the event down, put 400 odd people in their hotel rooms, and we pivoted to a broadcast studio in the Star Casino in about an hour and 46 minutes. And then since then, that was on the Friday. And then by Sunday, I basically was in the car driving myself up to Byron Bay, and I moved myself and 12 of my executives up to Byron Bay, but at the same time deploying 88 people completely remote in a period of, we made the decision to deploy our team remote at Thursday 6:30 p.m. And they were deployed remote by by Friday afternoon at 5:30. And again, a lot of this came down to the fact that I am very contingent. I plan probably more than anyone that I know, but I'm also, I guess, what you'd call, the gifts of some of the conditions that I've adopted over the years. I've had PTSD for the last close to 25, 30 years. And one of the beautiful gifts of PTSD is you're hyper aware to security threats, but you're also hyper aware to preparation. And someone who prepares a lot, this was I guess you could say my time to shine. So yeah, it was interesting.
Your backup plans have backup plans.
Every time.
Yeah. Beautiful. Unstoppable is the show you have. How do we change our messaging currently, like based on what is happening right now? How do we talk to our audience differently?
As a business?
Yes,
correct. Look, I think the way that we change our messaging, if we are a business, if we need to change it, is we start talking to people like human beings. I think one of the biggest challenges right now is, everyone seems to be responding in their own way. And, some people are responding with what they think they should respond with, which is, a level of front. Whereas, some of the most effective communication I'm seeing happen right now, especially in our organization and the areas that I'm paying attention to, is where you see high levels of authentic communication, genuine communication, where you've got, very high levels of transparency, but also incredible levels of certainty at the same time. Because it's one thing to be completely transparent and, be in a little bit of strife, and to be telling everyone you're in a little bit of strife, but you look like you're in, you look like you're stressed and you're desperate. That's one thing. But it's another thing to be able to resolve whatever emotional, regulate whatever emotions and stress that's coming up for you, and still be able to communicate in a way where you're being completely open and authentic, but you're doing it from a place of supreme certainty. You're doing it from a place of supreme, I guess you could say it's not so much about the confidence as it is about the certainty around what it is that you do. And during this time, I think what we need to understand is there's never been a greater requirement right now than there has been in this moment for people to be seen as leaders. And when people talk about the leadership badge, they often talk about the leadership badge, and leadership is not a badge. It's a behavior. What we're looking for in any form of a leader is not so much the words that they say, it's the example that they set, and whether or not those words align. And right now, whether you're a consumer or a business owner, there's got varying levels of uncertainty, from high levels of uncertainty to moderate to mild levels of uncertainty. But what everyone is looking for right now is they're looking for someone who's more certain than they are. They're looking for someone who has a greater sense of certainty and a greater sense of confidence in the situation than they have. And whoever that person is will be the leader in that moment, will be the leader in that situation, will be the leader in that context. Because ultimately, as human beings, we're mammals, right? We're collaborative in nature, and we're constantly looking to others in our environment to determine our responses when we're unsure. And right now, we're in a period where there's a lot of people who have no freaking idea how to respond. Can I swear?
We're all grown-ups.
Okay, they have no fucking idea how to respond, and they're looking around to people around them, and they're seeing a lot of other people who have no fucking idea how to respond. And on one end, you've got extreme apathy, where people are going, oh, she'll be mate, it's okay, we'll get through it. And on the other end, you've got people who are buying, 50,000 rolls of toilet paper. And what we need to find a calm center where we have an adequate level of preparation and an adequate level of awareness about what we're actually getting ourselves into. Not a diatribe of delusion of, guys, it's going to be okay, we're all in this together, which is one angle. But the reality is, things are going to get significantly more affected before they get better. Well, this is the beginning of what we're about to see. And if you're out there communicating that things are going to be getting better, and we're going through a period where we need to be consolidating the reality of what's going on, it's going to be hard to hold that message as we start to see some of the economic declines that we haven't even seen yet. The economic declines that are going to be transitioning as a result of this experience won't be felt really for 9 to 18 months. Right now, every country around the world is being held up with stimulus checks and credit. And when and everyone's had their loans deferred for 6 months, but 6 months from now, when the credit runs out, when the stimulus runs out, when the banks start asking for their money, we are going to be seeing record levels of unemployment, record levels of bankruptcies, record levels of recomposition. So it's not all bad news. There is going to be a significant recomposition. But when we communicate to people, there's got to be a level of, I guess you could say, alignment with that. Because if we are singing one tune, and the tune starts to change in the general market, people are going to look at us and go, well, hang on, you said everything was going to be all right. This is actually getting worse. And so, well, hang on, I want to be the guy that said, I'm preparing you for that. Do you know what I mean? Versus the guy that's saying, it's going to be okay. Because when you look at the apathy that I'm seeing right now, the problem with the apathy, with people going, it's going to be okay, is they're doing no preparation whatsoever. And the challenge is, I don't mind if people choose not to prepare for what's about to happen, but I do mind if they've got kids. Okay, I do mind if they have people that are responsible to them, that are dependent and can't make the big decisions for themselves. And that's where, as business owners, as consumers, we just have to have a higher level of responsibility in the way that we communicate to our clients, in informing them of where we're at, what's going on for us, but also our perspective. And I think when you look at it from a communications perspective, especially with podcasts, that's what people align with. That's why people follow Joe Rogan, because they align with perspectives. That's why people follow London Real. They align with perspectives. That's why people follow you, mate, is because they align with your perspectives. And what we need to do right now is be sharing alternative perspectives outside of just a marketing message. One that is real, that is relatable, that is authentic, that shares what's going on for you in this time, that many people could probably relate to as well.
Love it. I love when you get on a roll, because there's so much passion behind what you're saying, and it's just flowing, right? There's a question that's come through about loving your leadership style, Kerwin. And the question is, how do you model great leadership through your podcasting?
By the example that you set. And the example that you set comes down to the guests that you bring on. It comes down to the questions that you ask. It comes down to, the positioning and the perspective of what you do, you know, and for me, that's why Unstoppable's unstoppable. I want to get people behind the scenes of what's, you know, people who have got, in most cases, much bigger problems than the ones that they're dealing with, and they're seeing people who can actually move through them.
You've grown and so much over the last 5-6 years. It's been fantastic to watch your growth, Kerwin. It's amazing. How have you changed, like, from, you know, having the idea when you started off and then bringing people on and you had team and then you had to deal with operations and then culture? What has that process been like, and how has your content creation changed as a result?
Yeah. Look, I've changed radically as a human being. I've become a better father, a better leader. But, you know, if you look at the level of change, it's been governed by a level of preparation, because, you know, people say, oh man, you came onto the scene, you blew up in 2016. And it's like, yeah, I did, but I've been grinding since 2000. You know what I mean? And it only took me 16 years to become an overnight success. Which is only one part of the equation. But when you look at the content strategy, like my early content strategy is radically different to the content strategy I have now. Early content strategy was very creative. I mean, creator based, where I'd sit down and I'd map out a piece of content that I was going to deliver, and I'd deliver the piece of content. And, you know, then would publish the piece of content, and you'd get levels of interaction, and, you know, you'd work from there. But where we really came into our flow, when we really kind of came into our stream, was when we stopped trying to create content. We just started documenting it, you know, and that was the real shift, is when we went from trying to create videos to just, let's just put a video on Kerwin. Let's follow him for, you know, 24 hours a day. He does funny shit. He says funny shit. Every now and then he says something smart. Let's try and make sure we capture that. And he says a lot of stuff that's very offensive. So let's definitely catch that. And, you know, in the process, people get to see a real authentic transaction of relationship dynamics versus, well, here are the 3 things that you need to know when it comes to being a great leader. You know, they get to see leadership in action. They get to see tough conversations in action. They get to see, in some cases, people getting fired, in some cases, people getting hired. And I think that's the real difference. And it goes back to what I was saying before. That documentary content is more authentic because it's real. You're documenting real life. Now, when you're doing any form of creative work, you know, it's a distortion of whatever reality is there to make that reality look better. You know, that's what post-production is for, is to make the content look better. You know, and it's done with documentary as it is done with feature films as well, and fiction films. But ultimately, when you look at it from a social nature, it's the medium. You know, we're not watching movies yet on social media. Why? Because people like to have too many conversations, and people don't like people talking in their movies, right? And so as a result, the media that we share on social is more about social aspects, social perspectives, social integrations and interactions. And what leadership is a social dynamic. You know, what business is, you know, when you're hiring or firing someone, is a social dynamic. And so the reasons that documentation or documentary style content serves so well on social media is because it's a social platform. And so it serves to the medium that you're putting it out there. And so we will always get far more traction on our content that is documented than on our creative content that I sit down and go, okay, I'm going to, you know, put something together. Unless, of course, you know, you look at Jay Shetty, and Jay Shetty completely defies that. Where he will create content in the context of authentic transactions with the use of actors, which, you know, I guess is a mirror or a model of, and it also serves him quite well.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a big distinction between being the creator and now documenting. How like authenticity is a word that's thrown around a lot these days, and it's obviously have different definitions. How would you suggest? So how would you look at authenticity, and how would kind of you suggest people to create from that place?
That's a great question. Authenticity isn't a label; it's a journey. It's not a button. It's because in order to be authentic, you've got to know what is authentic. Do you know what I mean? And you know, one of the greatest pieces of advice that I could give to any human being around, if they're in the pursuit of what is authenticity, it's like spend 10 days in a quiet room, dark room with just yourself, nobody else. And by the end of it, you'll know who you are much better than you do right now. And, you know, in order to be, because a lot of people right now, especially with this whole fake it till you make it, you know, brigade, which I have nothing against, and it can be very psychologically helpful, but oftentimes what it produces is, you know, false senses of self. It produces a false reality or a false persona. And when you're trying to build self-worth, what you don't want to be doing is putting a facade on the front of a beautiful heritage building that just doesn't know that it's a heritage building. You want the heritage building to, clean off the dirt and the dust, and to get inside and to look around and go, fuck, I'm a heritage building. I don't need to be anything other than who I am. I don't need to fake it. I can just be the most authentic version of myself. But the only way I can do that is by really getting to know who I am. And the only way that you can really get to know who you are is by, quietening the mind down and really starting to have a lot more of internal reflections and start becoming aware of the conversations that you're having with yourself. Start becoming aware of the sub conversations that you're having with others. Because oftentimes we're sitting there having a conversation with a person, but there's like 3 other conversations that are going on in our head, which often, can be related to a negative diatribe of a judgment or perspective or seeing them better or seeing us worse or some, alternative, which isn't really very helpful.
Yeah, that self-worth piece is such a huge aspect of growth.
And how can you value yourself unless you know who you are? Do you know what I mean? And to me, there are things that we can do that can attribute to our value, in terms of being of service. But how do we know that, that makes us feel better unless we know ourselves well enough to know that we feel better and more valuable when we are of service? And so, I think when it comes to authenticity, the step one is get to know who you are. So you know what is authentic. Because I've been in this industry, or I've been in the information industry for like 20 years. I remember when I first started speaking 20 years ago, I used to stand up on stage and try and be the persona that I thought the crowd wanted to hear in order for them to listen to me. And I was like a chameleon, and I just stood up and I did whatever dance and song, whatever was required. And if I had to do a bit of Tony Robbins, I did a bit of Tony Robbins. If I had to do a bit of Brian Tracy, I did a bit of Brian Tracy. And, it was very confusing when I'd get off stage, go, oh, fuck, who am I now? Now I'm off stage. Who are you, Kerwin? And, over the last 20 years, I've got to the place where, I used to speak in suits with ties, and then suits with a t-shirt, and then just a suit pair of pants with a t-shirt, and then a pair of jeans and a collared shirt. And now, I rock up in a t-shirt. I don't even have shoes. Oh, actually I do have shoes on, but I walk around, I live in Byron Bay now. I walk around barefoot 99% of the time. And the reason I do that is, and please hear me when I say this, it's not that I don't care. I care deeply. I care more than any human that I've actually ever met. I just am not attached to the perspective of others, because I've learned how dangerous other people's perspectives being attached to mine are in the direction of my thought process and behaviors. And so, some people call it the 0 fuck scenario, where I literally have 0 fucks about what people think of me. And, if people go, well, you should care. It's like, it's not that I don't care. I do care. I'm just not attached. If you're going to say, give me some critical feedback, I'm going to listen. I'm not going to ignore it. I'm going to listen, but I'm just not going to attach my value, to your assessment of whatever your perspective is, which in most cases is a fragment of my reality. Because oftentimes we invest too much time in the perspective of others as to how they see us, when in reality they've only seen less than a 0.0001% of our personality and who we are. No one can fully know. We can't even fully know who we are. And so how can, if we can't not feel who we are, can we be so invested in these perspectives of others who've only known us for like half a second in the scheme of a fucking 20-hour movie? And so that's where I think authenticity is not a reflection. It's an introspection. And from that introspection, you create a reflection once you have that understanding and acceptance of self. And once you accept who you are and you don't judge who you are and you're more embracing it, yes, you can be more authentic, but now you get to start projecting that authenticity onto other people. Because most people don't see authenticity in others because they don't see it in themselves. And they're looking at others, businesses or consumers or otherwise, through the lens of their inauthenticity, which is not a bad thing. It's just they don't know, right? And I think oftentimes we judge others by our own judgments. We judge others by our own beliefs. We judge others by our own perspectives, and we judge others' own authenticity or their pursuit of authenticity based on ours. And oftentimes we never see people for who they are. We see them for who we see them as, based on our experience. And the more we can then get to a level of resolve where we can accept both the good and the bad within ourselves, now we're entering the realm of pure authenticity, because now I'm not trying to not show you my bad parts and just show you my good parts. Now I'm going to show you warts and all. And you know why I'm going to show you warts and all? Because I actually really love the bad parts of me, and I really love the good parts of me. And I'm pretty sure that you've got some bad parts and good parts as well. And by me doing that, I'm going to show you that I can love your bad parts and your good parts, because I'm not going to judge your bad parts and good parts through my own judgment, because I've learned to accept who I am. And that to me is what that's where we start getting into authentic transactions, unconditional relationships, unconditional dynamics.
Wow. This is a time where everyone sort of just bows down, and I would love for everyone in the room to just put in the chat what they got the most out of all this stuff that Kerwin has said so far. Kerwin, like, you are amazing with the way you've explained yourself, expressed yourself. It's phenomenal to watch.
Thank you, mate.
Your growth, man. It's just amazing to share your energy for this period of time. When you can look back at your career and you look back at how you started, and you look back and you look at all what people talk about in terms of your successes, what success matters to you, Kerwin, that people don't talk about?
Well, I don't know if they don't talk about it, but it's maybe not as mentioned as much, is anyone who meets my son within 30 seconds to a minute will say, "Oh my God, this kid is fucking incredible." And that to me is the greatest success that I've ever had in my life, because, you know, when we look at our team, you know, as one example, but especially when we look at our kids, they're a reflection of their upbringing. Do you know what I mean? And whether we like that or not, you know, that's a level of responsibility that some people either feel very comfortable with because they love their kids, or they feel very uncomfortable with because they love their kids, but they might be little shits, right? But the reality is, you know, our kids fundamentally are an expression of what they see and how they grow up. Yes, there's an enormous level of DNA and ancestral traits that can come through as well, but fundamentally, you know, that's what shapes us. You know, it's what shapes us. Our environments. We're mammals, and we are shaped by our environment. And so when people meet my son, you know, they are literally they are hit in the face with kindness, love, encouragement, acceptance, beautiful words. You know, friendship. He's just the most loving human being, and everyone who meets him says the same thing. And that to me is the ultimate success, because that's legacy. At some point, I'm gone. I'm gonna be dust, you know. But he, you know, ideally will still be here, and then hopefully his kids and his kids and his kids. And you know, we talk about legacy. Honestly, I don't give no offense to Gary. I fucking love Gary. He's a good mate, but I don't give a fuck how many people turn up to my funeral. I give a fuck how many people actually carry the message further. Do you know what I mean? Who carry that and share that. Because the biggest, and again, another aspect of success is when I have someone reach out to me and say, "Oh my God, you know, this is simple, this is easy, this is fun." I taught that to my kid, and my kid now uses it, you know, and they use it all the time, and their grades have improved, or they're happier, you know. And the thing that I'd put in there also is we probably get anywhere between 2 to 3 to 4 messages a week through social media from people who had planned out their day to die. They were literally getting ready to end their existence, and they were getting onto social media to basically have a look at people's profiles to either energetically or actuality say their little goodbyes. And then they find a fucking video, a sponsored video, or just a normal video that pops up that someone shared, and it's one of mine, and they watch it, and then something shifts, and they cry, they break down, they go and get help, and then they send me a message. And I've had hundreds now of these in the last 5 years from people going, "I was about to kill myself. I was getting ready to die. I'm a single mum. I'm a father. I'm a grandfather. And I saw this video and I decided that life was worth living." And so now I'm very conscious of the fact that by virtue of the documentation I put out there, I've actually changed the timelines of thousands of families all over the world, thousands of communities, if not more, all around the world, because there are now people still in those timelines. There are now fathers that are still present. There are now mothers that are still present. There are now sisters and brothers that are still present, you know, as a result of a fucking video or a podcast, you know. And that was the one thing that was required in order for that change to take place. And so that to me is leadership. You know, leadership is not so much, you know, not necessarily how we're seen, it's the effect that we have. You know, obviously, yes, it is how we are seen. It has a massive impact on the effect that we have. But I'm very comfortable with people not seeing me. And what I mean by that is if someone does have a perspective of me that is 2 seconds long, that is negative, they don't see me. They just saw that. And I'm okay with not being seen. Okay, that doesn't define my leadership. What defines my leadership, you know, is the broader picture, the macro, the meta of, you know, this person didn't like me for 20 seconds. That's okay. I've got this guy, he's known me for 4 minutes. He still likes me. Let's give it an hour. But this is also kind of falls into what I was saying before. Like a lot of people look at me and go, "Oh, you know, Kerwin, I'd really love to work for Kerwin." And I'd say to most people, "No, you fucking wouldn't," because I am. Yes, I'm an incredible coach. Yes, I'm very inspiring. Yes, I'm very direct and I'm very blunt. But trust me, I push people to limits that they never knew that they had. And I don't do it in an abusive way. I do that because that's how I'm wired. I'm wired to get the best out of people. And by virtue of that, I have a range of different styles that I use, whether it be with teammates or clients, because the techniques that I use with my teammates are the same techniques that I use with my clients. And my clients are either business owners, in some cases, military, in some cases, elite professional sports people. And so, we have to be servicing everyone with information that can, that works regardless of the scenario that you're in.
Yeah. Wow. We've got about a few minutes left, so I'm gonna. When you start speaking and you see the effect that it has even on people virtually. I mean, you see people. I can see people faces shift. I can see people change. I can see people's expression, and it's quite beautiful to watch. I would like to sort of ask you one final thing, because of how you can see trends and how empathetic you are towards people. What do you see in the podcasting world?
Well, I see the same trend in podcasting, and I see across a range of other mediums, and that's a stronger community focus. What we're seeing now is, especially now that we're being isolated in the way that we are, and we're being socially distanced, and the new languages and the new, beliefs that are coming through. There's never been a more important time than ever for people to really understand not just what a community is, but understand why community is so important, and why. Because like right now, I'm investing in two areas of my business. One of them is intelligence. I'm building an incredibly large intelligence agency within my business. But the second area that I'm building is in community management. And I predict that my community management team will be the biggest division in my company in the next 18 months. And they'll be responsible for managing a range of different communities based on a range of different mediums, podcast being one medium. Because what we're going to see now is we're seeing a lot more fractional engagement than we are social engagement. And what I mean by fractional engagement is, people aren't participating on main feed discussion. In most cases, they're participating in off-feed discussion, like Messenger as an example, but also groups. And groups is nothing more. Yes, it's big on Facebook, but that's nothing more than an expression of how we are fractionalizing socially, at whole. It's not just on Facebook. I'm seeing this come up more and more and more. We're seeing more of an emphasis on community and community development. And that, to me, there's never been a greater opportunity when you think about this commercially, because when you talk about building a community, okay, that should be a big focus, but we should understand the value of a community is in the repeated exposure, okay, and the significant levels of trust that can be born and built because of that level of proximity. When you look at it from a marketing perspective, someone who has bought from you is 8 times more likely to buy again and spend 16 times as much. That tells you everything you need to know. And when you understand the social implications of content exposure, which is based on and governed by what's referred to as the mere exposure effect. Now, the mere exposure effect is a psychological phenomena whereby people tend to develop a preference for things once they become familiar with them. Now, in social psychology, they refer to it as the familiarity principle. But what this means in terms of content or podcasts or business is people have to be exposed a certain number of times before all of a sudden they are triggered and they become what you'd call engaged, or a fan, or mildly more interested in what they were previously, enough to be able to actually actively start searching and seeking out more information, either on the website or a phone call. And again, I'd ask you guys by a show of hands, who here knows themselves that you have to see something a few times before you respond to it? Just by a show of hands, I'd be curious to know. Okay, well, the data says that's true, because in 2005, the average consumer needed to be exposed to 5.4 exposures to a piece of content or marketing advertising material before that little familiarity was triggered. And they went, oh, you know what? I'm going to give them a call. I'm going to go into the shop. I'm going to do this. Now, in 2012, that number jumped to 12.8 exposures. And in 2020, that number jumped to 20 exposures. And so when you think about that, most people, marketers will go, oh my God, I've got to market to someone 20 times. Whereas a community manager would go, are you kidding me? I have 20 interactions with most people in the first week in my group. And that is where we've got to understand the power of community, because community creates a context for repeated exposure if done in the right way, especially with good community standards and guidelines. And this is where having a strong community is useless if you don't have community guidelines, if you don't have community standards, if you don't have a code of conduct, if you don't have a benchmark of values and behaviors that is expected from that community, because otherwise you'll just have fucking chaos. And so in every one of our communities, we have a guideline, we have a code of conduct, we have a level of expectation, which basically keeps the peace. And again, this is what the greatest lesson in community management for me is governance. And this is what we all need to start thinking about is what is governance? What does governance look like at a community level? Because the more we can work out what governance looks like at a community level, the less we need governance. Does this make sense? The less we need governments. And I'm not saying we don't need a government, but what I do think we have right now all over the world is you have a community that have very, very misguided perspectives of what governance actually is, because it's governmental, it's legislation, it's law. And when we actually get to work in an environment, like actually be in a community, and we start to expose ourselves to, okay, what's actually involved, not just what's involved in participating in a community, any fucker can participate, what's involved in governing a healthy community, governing healthy dynamics within a community. So you don't have fucking trolling, so you don't have backbiting, politicking, and people trying to one-upmanship in any scenario. And that to me, when you consider governance, is probably one of the greatest things that we as a community need to learn, not just to be able to govern our own communities, but also to be able to self-govern. Because as far as I'm concerned, the future of humanity is in self-governance. The future of humanity is in self-management, self-leadership. And I don't mean, the disintegration of all, democracy and other constitutions and, government structures around the world. But what I am saying is innovation. We've all been set with a framework of governance that's a couple hundred years old that we essentially borrowed from another country, in Australia's context anyway. And we're trying to model that in our own lives, in our own families, in our own businesses, on Facebook, and it's not fucking working. We've got to learn new ways of governance. When it comes to self-governance, we've got to have new ways of governance when it comes to how do we govern ourselves with others. And then and that's leadership, by the way. And then we need to look at it at a broader level as how do we govern ourselves within a community to be able to set an example that we can actually use, as a rock or an anchor to point to in the event that we're trying to correct public behaviors where people don't point at us and go, well, you fucking do it all the time as well. So why should we not do it? And that's where leadership, especially at a community level, requires a level of vulnerability to put yourself on a line that most people just aren't willing to have. But if you've got a level of genuine authenticity and you deeply care, but you're not attached to what people think, now you're in for you're in the bonus round. Why? Because now you can play a real game, and now you can have real influence because you're not trying to be something that you're not. You're showing people that you fuck up and what you do, but you're also showing people how you fuck up and what you do when you do fuck up. How do you handle that fuck up? Because people will point to you and say, well, you're telling us to do something that you're doing yourselves. And your goal is to go, yeah, you're 100% right. But your goal is to get to the point where if you do something that's not expected from the community, you don't wait for them to tell you. You go to them and say, guys, look what I did. Here's how I handled it. And you demonstrate what it looks like, to be able to own your shit or govern or be responsible, in that context. I know I'm taking you away over time, aren't I?
Kerwin, it's been a little slice of heaven. I'm always appreciative to meet someone that cares and loves themselves slightly more than what other people think about them. So it's been an absolute pleasure to host you and have you share our energy for so long. Thank you so much for all that you do. Ladies and gentlemen, KerwinRae.com, Unstoppable Podcast. Thank you so much, Kerwin.
The one message that I absolutely loved about that was leadership is not a badge. It's a behavior.
Yeah, stop going for the badge. Show people what leadership looks like. Don't wait until someone gives you a title. Show people.
Mate, thank you so much for being here. We know there's a million things you could be doing.
Bless you guys.
We really appreciate it.
My pleasure.
Everyone go and subscribe to Unstoppable with Kerwin Rae. It's an incredible podcast. You don't even need to listen to it. Just give him a 5-star rating straight away because you've heard him here.
Make sure you listen to it as well.
Go and listen to it as well. It's got some seriously incredible guests and some great stuff on there too. So go and check out Kerwin Rae's website as well, kerwinrae.com.